My name is Emily Carter. I am 33 years old, and on the night that matters most in this story, a federal judge was standing at the end of my mother's dining table, holding a champagne flute, delivering what was supposed to be a toast about my brother's engagement. It had gradually become something else entirely. It had become my cross-examination. He stopped walking directly in front of my chair. Every conversation in the room snapped shut, the way a door does when a draft catches it. A moment earlier, he had been speaking warmly about family and honesty and trust as the foundation of everything. My mother was glowing. My brother was grinning. His fiancé was looking at him like he had personally arranged the stars. And then the judge looked directly down at me, calm, measured, with the exact courtroom stillness I had watched from a gallery seat 8 months earlier, and said, "I have to say, I am surprised to see you here." His eyes did not move. Then he asked the one question that ripped my family story in half. "Who are you to them, exactly?" The room went still. Forks stopped midway to mouths. The air felt suspended. My mother let out a high, thin laugh and reached for a smooth line about me being her daughter who did simple office work up in the city. But the judge did not look at her. He kept watching me with the patient attention of a man who already knew the answer and simply wanted to see whether I would tell the truth or repeat the lie I had been asked to deliver. The man my mother had spent weeks trying to impress was watching me, not her golden son, not her carefully arranged table. Me, the daughter she had told me to hide. Under that stare, my mind flashed back to 1:30 that morning, when my phone had buzzed on my nightstand and my father's name appeared on the screen. His voice had come through low and careful, like a man reading from a script he was not allowed to drop. My mother's voice had cut sharp in the background. "Her father is a federal judge. Do not embarrass us the way you always do." I had said fine. I had thought I could swallow myself for one more night. I had driven 3 hours and walked into that house believing I could sit quietly.
The mantel in our living room held 6 framed photographs. 5 of them were my brother Ryan at various stages of childhood: t-ball, soccer, the church Christmas play, a birthday party with frosting on his chin, and one formal portrait in a clip-on tie. The 6th was me. A school picture from 2nd grade, stiff and front-toothed, tucked behind a chunky ceramic angel and a trailing fake ivy plant. You had to lean left and crane your neck just to find my eyes. I noticed this in the vague peripheral way children notice things before they have the vocabulary to name what they are noticing. Then one afternoon, I dragged a dining chair across the room, climbed up, and moved my photograph. I placed it dead center between 2 of Ryan's. Then I climbed down, pushed the chair back, and waited. The next day when I got home from school, everything was exactly as it had been. My photo was behind the ivy. The chair was at the table. No one mentioned it. No one explained it. It had simply been corrected, the way you correct a spelling error, quickly, without ceremony, as though it had never been anything other than a mistake. I stopped moving the photograph and started moving myself. Every time she erased me, I raised the stakes. That was the first mantle test. I ran them for the next 26 years. After that afternoon, I stopped moving the photograph and started moving myself. If Ryan made the all-star team, I decided that straight A's would earn my picture a better position. When he hit a game-winning double, I decided that graduating as valedictorian would finally prompt my mother to brag about me to someone, anyone. Instead, I finished 2nd in my class, and my mother skipped my graduation to sit on a metal bleacher at a regional playoff where Ryan, by her own admission on the phone that evening, had almost gotten put in. I accepted a full scholarship to Northwestern, packed everything I owned into my rusted Civic, and drove the 3 hours to Chicago with my father's stiff hug still on my shoulders and my mother's parting words lodged in my ear. "Don't go getting any ideas above your raising." At college, I discovered what I was actually good at, and more importantly, what I loved. Words, records, the specific electric feeling of cracking something open that people in power had hoped would stay sealed. I became the student who stayed in the newsroom until 3 in the morning chasing leads for stories nobody thought would matter until they landed on the front page.
My brother Ryan is 4 years younger than me. Broad smile, easy laugh, the kind of man strangers instinctively describe as a good guy within 5 minutes of meeting him. He sells used cars at a large dealership lot off the interstate outside Indianapolis. That is honest work, and there is nothing wrong with it. But in my mother's telling, it became something else entirely. To hear her version, Ryan was a regional sales director for a major automotive group on the verge of a corporate promotion. She told the ladies at church he managed dozens of employees and was flown out for conferences. My personal favorite was the time she informed her book club he had closed a multi-million-dollar fleet deal with the state. I only learned about that one because one of those women messaged me on social media to say how proud I must be of my baby brother's accomplishments. Meanwhile, Ryan still lived 15 minutes from our childhood home, had a supervisor who scheduled his shifts, and occasionally texted me asking whether I knew anyone in the market for a reliable minivan. For my mother, the issue was never what was true. It was what sounded right. And nothing about my life fit the picture she wanted on display. The first time I heard her inflate his title to his face, I laughed, genuinely believing it was self-aware exaggeration. Mom, that is not his job. He is a sales associate. She gave me a look that could have cured food and said, "It sounds better this way. Why do you always have to be so negative?" Slowly, I understood. For her, the issue was never accuracy. It was presentation, and nothing about my life fit the picture she needed on display. I did not have a husband or children. I lived alone in a one-bedroom apartment in the city with a dying ficus and a stack of reporter notebooks on the kitchen counter. My work as an investigative journalist meant public hearings, records requests, and a deliberate willingness to make powerful people uncomfortable. There was no version of that she could spin into the portrait of a perfect small-town mother. So she spun something else instead. She built what amounted to a fan page for Ryan. Post after post on her social media. Ryan in a suit at a dealership awards event. Ryan holding a sales plaque. Ryan grilling burgers in the backyard under a caption about how hard he worked for his people. I scrolled through 2 full years of her posts one night after coming home from filing a story on corruption in the city housing department. I had just
¿Te la gota?
reporting was being considered for a national review.
Venga, frótate la mano
Last
ya.
year, my editor gave me the green light on a series I had been building toward for months. A pattern of police shootings in a neighboring city.
Corto ya.
8 months of work. Body camera footage, civil court transcripts, records requests filed and fought over, and every day of a civil trial in which a teenager's family sued the police department for the use of deadly force. The federal judge assigned to the case was a composed, silver-haired man with a deliberate gaze and the kind of focused attention that fills a room even when he is saying nothing. From my gallery seat, I watched him listen. I watched him ask precise questions. I watched him manage a very difficult proceeding with the particular gravity of someone who understands that the words spoken in his room will matter long after the room has emptied. After the verdict, he spoke on a criminal justice panel that my editor sent me to cover. When the room cleared, he stopped me in the hallway. "Miss Carter," he said, "your series was some of the most thorough reporting I have seen on this issue. It takes genuine courage to hold a system like that to the light." He shook my hand and kept walking. I stood there clutching my notebook, the way you hold something solid when the ground has just shifted under you. For a few seconds, I genuinely wanted to call my mother and tell her, "A federal judge, courtroom hallway, your daughter's name on his lips as an example of journalism that mattered." I did not call, because the last time I had tried to share a significant work moment with her, she had replied, "Honey, nobody wants to hear about all that depressing stuff. Anyway, did I tell you Ryan might be getting a company car?" I tucked the compliment into the same quiet interior drawer I kept every professional win she had never wanted to see. I did not imagine in that courthouse hallway that the judge and my family would one day occupy the same room. The call came on a Tuesday night, technically Wednesday morning because my phone lit up on the nightstand at 1:30 a.m. My father's name on the screen at that hour meant only one thing in my nervous system: emergency. I fumbled it to my ear, already sitting up, heart already moving fast. "Dad, what is happening? Is everyone all right?" His voice came through low and scripted. "Em, your brother and his fiancée are having her parents over for dinner on Friday. Your mother says you can come." Can. Not should, not we want you here, not your brother would love it. Can, as though my presence were a privilege being extended on condition. Then my mother's voice came through sharp behind him. "Did you tell her? Did you?" My father cleared his throat. "Her father is a federal judge. It is a big night for Ryan." And my mother cut in at full volume. "Emily, you can come, but you need to keep your mouth shut about your job. Do you understand me?" I stared at the ceiling in the dark and made myself breathe. "Why?" She answered without hesitation. "Because this dinner is about your brother, not you. You have that reporter thing, and your stories upset people. Just tell them you work in an office in Chicago. Do not go into it. You know how you are." I knew exactly how I was. I was the daughter whose career made her inconvenient, whose professional life could not be made to fit the frame, whose success, if acknowledged, would only raise questions about why the spotlight had been elsewhere all this time. "Fine," I said. My father exhaled with the relief of a man who just diffused a device he barely understood. "See you Friday, kiddo." When the call ended, I lay in the dark and thought the mantle test had followed me all the way to Chicago, and I was apparently still failing it. On Friday afternoon, I left the Herald a little earlier than usual, swapped my standard jeans and press badge for dark jeans and a navy blouse, and reached for a blazer in the back of my closet almost without thinking about it. It was the one I had worn on stage the night I accepted the national award for the police shooting series. I had not planned to wear it. I had reached for it on instinct. But as I slid my arms into the sleeves and stood in front of the narrow mirror by my door, I understood why it felt right. It was not vanity. It was armor, a quiet personal reminder that whatever story was about to be performed in that house, I knew who I actually was. The drive from Chicago to Maple Grove is just under 3 hours when traffic is cooperative. Cornfields, truck stops, billboards, long stretches of highway thin as wire. I usually fill that drive with podcasts and coffee. That afternoon, I drove in complete silence, replaying years of small edits and flat-out lies. The neighbor who told me she was sorry my writing career had not worked out, 2 weeks after my promotion. My aunt who squeezed my arm at Thanksgiving and whispered that she was praying for me, as though my independence and my career were a chronic condition that might eventually clear up if I just came home and worked somewhere quieter. The blazer was the one I had worn on stage accepting a national award. I wore it not out of vanity, I wore it as armor. Halfway there, I pulled into a gas station and stood outside in the cold while the tank filled, looking at my reflection in the dark window glass. High cheeks from my father's side, my mother's gray eyes, the blazer sitting on my shoulders like a quiet announcement. I tried to picture myself walking into that house and refusing, saying, "I will not do this. I will not lie about who I am so you can feel comfortable introducing me to a man who has already shaken my hand and called my work important." Then I heard my brother's laugh in my memory, the particular easy laugh from 1,000 Saturday afternoons when he used to sit at my feet coloring while I read to him, and I thought, one quiet dinner. That is all this has to be. I can do this for him. I arrived an hour before the guests were due. The house looked exactly as it had since I was 15. Same shutters, same seasonal wreath on the door, same wind chimes. My mother opened the door before I knocked, eyes already scanning me from collar to shoes to assess whether I matched the version of me she intended to present. You are early, she said. Not a hello, not a hug. Come in. We need to walk through a few things. She moved through the rooms like a director setting stage marks, gesturing at chairs, positioning glasses, talking through the seating arrangement. When she reached my place at the table, she pointed to the far end. A single place card with my name sat quietly removed from the center of everything. Of course, even the dinner geometry kept me on the perimeter. Mom, I tried, are you really going to introduce me as someone who does generic office work? She straightened a napkin that did not need straightening. Emily, you are so dramatic. No one cares what you do. They just need to know you have a job. Your brother is the one building a family here. Do not make this complicated. In his recliner, my father held the local paper in front of his face like a shield. He had perfected this maneuver over decades, the art of being technically present while remaining completely unavailable. The doorbell rang and the house switched into performance mode. My brother's fiancée, Megan, came in first, tall, warm, with the kind of open face that makes you want to exhale. She hugged my mother, kissed Ryan's cheek, then turned to me with her hand extended. You must be Emily. He's told me so much about you. What do you do in Chicago? For one electric second, I could feel the true answer right there on my tongue. Then my mother materialized at my shoulder, her nails barely grazing my arm, just enough to communicate the instruction. Emily just does administrative work for a little office downtown. Nothing too exciting. Now, let me see that ring. Megan looks back at me once over her shoulder, eyes moving from my face to my posture to the blazer, as though she could feel the seam where my mother's sentence and the reality did not quite align. The second doorbell rang, and the judge walked in.
He was taller than he appeared behind the bench. His wife, Diane, had the composed, self-possessed bearing of someone who had spent her adult life being introduced as someone's wife and had kept her own mind throughout all of it. My mother launched into handshakes and compliments with a rehearsed warmth she reserved for people she considered important. So honored, so wonderful to finally meet you. Come in, please. This is our son, Ryan. She placed both hands on Ryan's shoulders when she said it, presenting him the way you present a prize. Then she turned toward me, and I noticed it, the almost imperceptible shift in her voice, lighter, faster, briefer. And this is our daughter, Emily. She works in an office in Chicago, keeps busy, but nothing too intense. The judge took my hand. His grip was firm and warm. His eyes locked onto my face and stayed there one beat longer than a standard introduction requires. Carter, he said slowly. Emily Carter. The way he said it was not the vague recognition of a face that looks familiar from somewhere forgettable. It was the specific recalibrating look of a man cross-referencing something in front of him against the file in his head. Carter. Emily Carter. He said my name the way a judge says something when the record does not match the testimony. My mother laughed too loudly and broke the handshake by steering him toward the table, but as he moved away, he glanced back at me, noting, filing. Dinner began with my mother in complete command, pouring wine, replenishing bread, narrating Ryan's fabricated career trajectory in a steady, cheerful stream. Every time a question drifted toward me, she redirected it before it could land. Emily, could you get more ice? Emily, check on the rolls. See if the coffee needs starting. Disappearance by errand. It was elegant in its way. She had been practicing it for 30 years. The judge watched this. His wife watched it more closely. I caught Diane noticing the pattern with the quiet attention of a woman who knows precisely what she is seeing. When Megan tried again, so Emily, you love living in the city? I love Chicago. My office is right near... And my mother launched cleanly over me. Speaking of cities, did we tell you Ryan might be going to Dallas for a conference? My sentence died in the middle. The judge's gaze sharpened. Diane set her fork down with a small, deliberate click. The table noise continued, but something underneath had shifted, the way a room feels different when a window has been quietly opened somewhere and cold air has begun to move. The judge lifted his glass and tapped it with his knife. The clean ring cut through my mother's latest story about Ryan's sales figures and brought every head up in the room.
"If I may," he said, "I would like to say a few words." My mother, practically luminous, this was the moment she had been building the entire evening toward. "Of course," she said, "we would be honored." He stood, buttoned his jacket in the measured way of someone accustomed to rooms going still when they rise. He spoke to Megan first, telling her she had always had an uncommon ability to see people as they actually were, that it was a rare and valuable gift. Then to Ryan, "I believe in second impressions as much as first ones. This dinner was meant to let us see each other." Ryan smiled like a man who had just passed a test. My mother's hand found her father's under the table. Then the judge began to walk slowly around the table, making eye contact with each person in the old courtroom manner. When he reached my corner, he stopped, turned toward me fully, and let the silence stretch just long enough for every set of eyes in the room to follow his. "I have to say," he said with a weight that had not been there during the toast, "I am surprised to see you here." He looked at me, not at my mother, at me. "Who are you to them exactly?" In the half second before I answered, I considered doing what I had been asked, smiling, deflecting, saying something about administrative work and changing the subject. I could feel the shape of it, the polite non-answer, the graceful sidestep, the practiced smallness I had been refining since I was 7 years old and learned that keeping quiet was the price of staying in the room. Then I remembered the courthouse hallway, the handshake, the words, "Your series was some of the most thorough reporting I have seen on this issue." I remembered the stack of notebooks on my counter, the 8 months of trial transcripts, the nights in the newsroom, the award and the blazer I was wearing. I remembered my name deleted from a comment, my elbow cropped from a photograph, my photograph behind the ivy. 33 years of being edited out of my own family story by the woman currently holding her breath 2 chairs away. "I am their daughter," I said, "and Ryan's sister, and I am an investigative reporter for the Chicago Herald." The silence that followed had a different texture than an ordinary pause. It was dense. It had weight. My mother's chair scraped back an inch. "You know," she said with a laugh strung tight as wire, "Emily plays around with a little writing, but really she just does office work. Nothing too serious." The judge finally turned his head toward her. His expression was blank in the specific way that communicates everything without saying a word. Then he looked back at the table. "Mrs. Carter," he said, using my professional name with deliberate precision, "your series on the Southport police shootings was some of the most important journalism I have encountered in my courtroom. Your reporting was cited in 3 separate legal briefs filed in my case." The sound my mother made was not a word. It was the sound of thin ice cracking under weight it was never designed to hold. Diane inhaled. Megan's eyes went wide, moving from the judge to me and back again with the rapid recalibration of someone whose entire understanding of the dinner she was sitting at has just been rewritten. Diane set her wineglass down with the deliberate care of a woman choosing her words. "My husband told us your daughter worked in an office," she said to my mother, her voice level and absolutely cold. "Nothing about front-page investigations." My mother fumbled with her napkin. "I did not want to make a fuss. Emily does not like attention. I did not want to put pressure on her." Megan turned to face Ryan fully. "Is that true?" she asked. "You never told me your sister was that Emily Carter, the one whose articles we read in my nursing program. She's literally the reason we had a unit on police accountability." Ryan's face had gone blotchy. Mom did not want drama. The words came out small and ashamed in equal measure. The judge looked at my brother with the even, unhurried patience of a man who has spent his career listening to people say things that reveal far more than they intended. "Drama," he said, "is what happens when people lie and then have to live with the fallout. What is happening right now is simply the truth arriving at the table." Then he shifted his gaze down the table. "And since we are clarifying things, what exactly is your position at the dealership, Ryan?" Ryan blinked, startled to find himself suddenly in the center of it. I'm in sales. My mother lunged instantly. He's practically a manager, practically a director. The judge raised one palm, the same subtle gesture I'd watched entire courtroom proceedings bring to order. Let him answer. He looked at Ryan. Your actual title. Ryan exhaled like a man putting something down he had been carrying for too long. Senior sales associate. I do not manage anyone. The only thing I direct is where people sign.
The room sank into a silence denser than anything that had come before it. Megan pushed her chair back slowly, folded her napkin with deliberate care, and said quietly, "I need some air." Ryan reached for her hand. "Megan, wait, this is nothing. Mom just likes things to sound nice." She pulled back. "Likes things to sound nice," she repeated. Not loudly, but with the particular precision of a person who has just decided to be completely honest in a room full of people who have not been. Or likes to rewrite reality, because there is a real difference between those two things. And if you stood by while she erased your sister and lied to my parents about both of you, I need to understand what that tells me about you. My mother broke in then, tears arriving with practiced timing. "I only did what any mother would do. I wanted you to see our family at its best." Diane stood, and the soft scrape of her chair carried across the room. "No," she said, "any mother might brag, any mother might round a detail up, but what you did was erase one child to inflate another and then ask her to help you do it. That is not love, that is control." What you did was erase one child to inflate another and then ask her to help you do it. That is not love. That is control. My father spoke then, in a voice gone rusty from disuse. She is right. Everyone turned toward him as though a piece of furniture had unexpectedly announced itself. "Linda," he said to my mother, in the simplest sentence I had ever heard him deliver directly, "you went too far." My mother's tears shifted from performance to something rawer and more real, the specific terror of a person watching the stories they have lived inside for decades begin to dissolve. "I did this for you, Ryan. I wanted you to have a good life, good opportunities. I wanted people to see you in the best possible light." Her voice cracked. Who would want to marry into a family where the daughter stirs up trouble and the son just sells cars? Megan let out a sound that was half laugh and half something that had been building for a long time. "You did not think a federal judge and a nurse could handle the idea that your daughter holds police departments accountable and your son has an honest job?" she asked. "That was the version of your family you were ashamed of?" The judge walked the few steps to my corner of the table and placed a business card beside my plate. "If you ever want a reference for a panel or a fellowship, you have my number now." He said it to me, not to the room, not to my mother, not to Ryan, not to the carefully arranged centerpiece or the place cards or the performance that had been 3 weeks in the staging. To me, directly, as one professional to another. In that moment, my mother's version of the world finally tilted on its axis. The man she had spent weeks trying to impress, the important person for whom she had insisted her daughter hide her career and lie about her life, was standing in the corner of her own dining room, handing her invisible daughter his phone number. Megan straightened, wiped her eyes carefully, looked at my brother for a long moment in which something was clearly being weighed and found wanting. Then she reached down, slid the ring from her finger and set it on the table runner in front of him, gently, without a scene. "I cannot marry into this as it stands, not unless something changes substantially. I need time." She picked up her coat and walked toward the door. My mother's wail cut through the room. "You cannot do this. You cannot ruin his life because his sister wanted a moment in the spotlight." I stood slowly and placed my napkin beside my plate. I did not want the spotlight. I wanted a seat at my own family's table where I did not have to pretend to be someone smaller.
The judge held the door. Diane walked through. Megan followed, pausing at the threshold to look back at me. "Thank you," she said simply, "for telling the truth." Then she was gone. My brother stared at me from across the table, eyes raw and wide. "You just destroyed everything," he said, his voice cracking in the middle of it. "No," I replied. "I just refused to keep helping Mom destroy me." Then I turned to face my mother. She had gone very still, which was somehow worse than the noise. "I love you," I said, "but this is the last night I will ever make myself small so you can feel large. If you want me in your life from now on, it will be as I am, not as some diminished version you find acceptable to display." She flinched the way people flinch when words land exactly where they were aimed. My father bowed his head. Neither of them spoke. I picked up my blazer from the back of my chair and walked out of the house I grew up in without waiting for anyone to call me back. No one did. The drive back to Chicago that night was the strangest kind of quiet, not the numb, headachy silence I usually carried home from family gatherings where I had smiled through things I should have named. This was different. It was the silence after a building has finally been condemned and brought down. You can still see the outline of where it stood, but the air is cleaner without the weight of it. My hands shook on the steering wheel once I reached the interstate. All the adrenaline I had managed at the table finally getting permission to move through my body. I did not turn on the radio. I drove in the quiet and let the evening replay itself. Megan's expression when she understood who I was. The judge's voice, even and immovable. My father's 3 broken words. The sound of the ring being set on the table runner. I got home close to midnight, left my phone face down on the counter, and went to bed. In the morning, I made coffee first, then flipped it over. 12 messages. My mother in a rapid overnight stream. "You have destroyed your brother's future. Megan left with them. I hope that career you love so much keeps you warm when you are alone." Ryan, scattered and defensive. "Why could you not have just said you worked in an office? It was one dinner." And then the message that stung most because it was truest. "You always have to make everything about you." My father had sent one message at dawn, 3 words. "I am sorry, Em." More than I had ever heard from him in person, in one sentence, in my entire life. And then there was a number I did not recognize, local area code from back home. I opened it slowly. "Hi, Emily. This is Megan. I am so sorry about last night. I had no idea what your mother had told you about me. If you are willing, I would like to meet for coffee when I'm next in the city. I want to hear your side of things without anyone editing it for me." I read that message 3 times. Something in my chest released. A tension I had been carrying so long I had stopped recognizing it as tension. It just felt like the normal weight of existing in my family. Now, with it loosening, I could finally feel how heavy it had actually been. Megan and I met 2 weeks later at a cafe near my office. She arrived in jeans and a sweatshirt, hair in a messy bun, looking more like a grad student than the poised woman from the dinner. She told me what my mother had told her parents, that I was unstable, that the city had changed me, that it was best not to bring up complicated topics in my presence. My father was expecting someone fragile at that table, she said. Instead, he saw the woman whose articles he had been quoting to his law clerks for months. She told me Ryan had admitted he knew, not every specific lie, but the general shape of them. He had shrugged it off as just how your mom is. I let the phrase sit between us for a moment before I said, "That sentence is how bad behavior stays embedded in families for generations, just how they are. It is the most dangerous shrug in the world." Megan nodded. "I am not saying Ryan is a bad person," she said, "but he has been willing to let you pay the cost of his comfort, and I cannot build a marriage on that foundation without knowing he can see it. A boundary is not a wall, it is a door, and you get to decide who walks through it." A month later, Ryan called me himself, voice rough and unpolished. "I am starting therapy," he said. "I don't know exactly what I'm doing, but I know I cannot keep pretending Mom is harmless." His apology did not come as a speech. It came in fragments, the way real apologies tend to arrive. For laughing when she dismissed my stories, for never telling Megan the truth, for the way he had looked across that table with more anger at me than at the lies that had just unraveled his own future. My mother went silent for 6 weeks. No messages, no passive-aggressive group texts, no holiday check-ins, just a quiet from Maple Grove that for the first time did not feel like punishment. It felt like a system that had been forced to shut down and reboot. The first break came as a single text. No accusations, no strings, just, "I miss you." I waited a day, then replied, "I miss you too, but I will not come back into your house under the old rules. If you want me there, it has to be as your daughter, the reporter, not the imaginary office girl." She did not respond immediately. Life continued. I covered another significant case. The judge and Diane invited me for what they called a do-over family dinner. Megan came too, not as Ryan's fiancé, but as herself. We sat at a round kitchen table with no head seat, no place cards, no assigned corners. Diane passed me the salad and said at one point, "In this house, you never have to pretend to be anyone but who you are." The sentence landed harder than some court rulings I've spent weeks parsing. About 3 months after the dinner, my mother called on a Tuesday afternoon. I watched her name buzz on my screen and then answered. A long breath. Then a voice I hadn't quite heard from her before. Smaller, slower, without performance in it. "I don't know how to do this," she said, "but your father says I should try starting with the truth. I wanted that night to make us look like a family worth marrying into, and I was terrified that if they knew who you really were, they would think less of us." It came out twisted. I let the silence sit. Then she said, "I'm sorry for lying about you. I'm sorry for asking you to hide. I don't understand your world, but I should have asked you to explain it instead of pretending it didn't count." It wasn't the grand public reckoning some part of me had imagined, not a formal retraction, not a speech in front of witnesses, but it was a crack in a wall I genuinely believed might never move. "I will not accept being made small again," I told her, "but if you're willing to learn a different way of being my mother, I'm willing to try." A few weeks after that, I drove back to Maple Grove for the first time since the dinner. No occasion, just a Saturday. My father met me on the porch and pulled me into a hug that lasted 2 beats longer than his hugs usually do. Inside, the first thing I looked at was the mantel. 6 photographs still, but my childhood picture was no longer behind the ivy. It was front and center next to Ryan's most recent photograph. The ceramic plant had been moved to one side, a little crookedly, as if my mother hadn't quite known what to do with it once it no longer had a purpose. I stood there looking at that small, imperfect rearrangement and understood that this was as close as she could currently come to standing in a room and saying plainly, I was wrong. Later, over meatloaf at the kitchen table, she asked, "So, how does a story of yours go from an idea in your head to the front page?" A simple question, the kind any parent might toss out over dinner. For me, it felt like a door opening. I answered, step by step, and she listened, without redirecting to Ryan, without making my work sound like a hobby, without changing the subject. That's what I want to leave you with. If you've ever sat at a table where your own family treated you like a supporting character in their story, love that demands you shrink is not love, it's management. If someone needs you to lie about who you are in order for them to feel comfortable, they are not protecting you, they're protecting the story they tell about themselves. A boundary is not a wall, it is a door, and you get to decide who walks through it. The first person who needs to know you're done making yourself small isn't the person who asked you to, it's you.